Dana?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There do seem to be a few points that, or there does seem to be a few points that would require some comment and consideration. I would suggest that trying to offer an argument about Blackwater based on whether it is officially there to support the State Department or officially there to support the Defense Department is nitpicking at worst. And I am not a lawyer, so I don't try to use little differentiations like that as a means to negate a policy. Policy should be discussed, certainly consultation should be made, but I think that clearly the U.S. Marines at our embassies are there to support the State Department, but they are certainly U.S. Marines, and they are and thus part of the Defense Department as well. I mean, the Defense Department and the State Department are part of the United States government after all, and I do believe Blackwater is playing a very significant and positive role in protecting the diplomatic personnel in conflict situations, and so I wouldn't necessarily try to focus on that type of distinction to make a fundamental decision. Obviously, the decision as to whether or not we're going to do what they're going to do, whether Blackwater will be sent in the first place, is a fundamental decision that Congress should be consulted on, and should not be necessarily, and should not be something the President can just do on his own. Anyway, with that said, let me note my area of disagreement with the Colonel, and or Colonel, do you like to call it Colonel or Doctor?
What I answer to most things, so whatever works for you.
Yes, sir. Well, I noticed you did spend a career service in the military as well as now a trained diplomat. But let me just note this, that I do fundamentally disagree with your comparison, and it has always been something that rubbed me the wrong way, is to comparing a United States support of a democratic government to a Soviet action in support of defense of socialism. The Soviet actions of the defense of socialism were basically to maintain the Marxist-Leninist dictatorship, and Leninism is by its very nature and unapologetically for the dictatorship of the proletariat, dictatorship. And I think it's fundamentally different when the United States goes out to defend countries that are groups of people who are trying to establish democracy in a country rather than trying to establish socialism as they said it, but it was actually dictatorship, because we could have cared less whether it was socialism or capitalism being implemented in a society as in El Salvador and elsewhere, where we supported a socialist group down there as opposed to the communist group. So that I disagree with, that designation, and just wanted to make that part of the record. Let me see here. And back to that point, I think that the United States of America, I think that it is an honorable thing for us to try to be willing to use force, be willing to extend our help to those people throughout the world who are actually promoting or trying to maintain democratic institutions in the face of an onslaught. Either, for example, if you have a group of people, and Colonel, again, you mentioned that you have trouble figuring out who is the legitimate government in Iraq, and who are we really talking to? I'll have to say that in every conflict situation, you're going to have that trouble. Who were we dealing with when we dealt with de Gaulle? Was de Gaulle elected as someone who could legitimately represent the French interest? Well, we dealt with de Gaulle because de Gaulle was a counterbalance to the Nazis and the Vichy regime that had been placed in power by the Nazi invasion of France. We're never going to, you know, if we want to be so definitive that people have to go through certain processes before they're legitimate enough for us to deal with and to make agreements with, well, we are severely limiting our impact on the world while enhancing the ability of totalitarian forces to have their influence on the world. My only suggestion is that when we deal with de Gaulle or anybody else, that we make sure that we do it within a democratic framework here at home. And whether or not we're going to send Blackwater overseas or not should be based on whether or not a consultation with Congress in that fundamental decision as to whether they should go or not. Whether or not that's part of the President's prerogative to declare them to be free of liability or not, we can discuss that here at home and make that, establish that concept and that precedent. But for certainly, if they're going to be sent, they need to come here and it has to be approved. I think there's no doubt about that. Now, some of the other points have been made. Pardon me for reading my own notes here while we. Oh yeah, about the concept of wouldn't it the discussion with Saddam Hussein about that initial discussion did get us into a problem when and should someone have been able to in discussing that threaten the use of force to Saddam Hussein. Unfortunately, and did that indeed impact on the creation of the problem that we face today? And let me just note in that discussion with Saddam Hussein, that infamous discussion with Saddam Hussein, what was the problem was not whether or not the person expressing that, and I believe it was April Gillespie, that the problem wasn't whether she had the authority or whether the president had the authority to say, we're going to stop you and all this other stuff. It's what she said was the problem. What she said gave the impression that we didn't care whether or not Saddam Hussein went into Iraq. Now, whether or not someone who is having discussions with Saddam Hussein from the State Department or any administration should have the power to say, if you go into the Kuwait, we're going to stop you. That's a matter of discussion of whether, you know, do we want the president to have that kind of authority? I think we do, and I think that we have suggested, for example, and I think law would, you would probably agree with this assessment, that under the War Powers Act, the president would have had power for at least 90 days to commit U.S. troops to prevent Saddam Hussein from invading Kuwait. And whether or not he needs power to expand that power, I wouldn't